Board game literature in the LA Public Library. The LA Public Library. Why did I choose the LA Public Library? It was a matter of convenience. The collection was pretty much exactly the right size that I needed. I did a number of searches at a number of public libraries, and many were too small, some were too large. Some facts about LA. It's a very large community. There's a population of approximately 10.2 million people. It's very close to the Mexican border, and as such it has a population that 48% identify as Hispanic. Because it has such a large geographic area and population, there are 73 branches of the LA Public Library. The LA Public Library has 6 strategic goals in their collection development policy. They hope to cultivate and inspire young readers, nurture student success, champion literacy and lifelong learning, contribute to LA's economic growth, stimulate the imagination, strengthen community connections, and celebrate LA. I kept these strategic goals in mind when I made my weeding and selection choices. Collection evaluation. So how did I evaluate the LA Public Library's collection on board game literature? It's a rather difficult task because board game literature is not necessarily labeled under one thing. It can be a variety of things. Mathematical books could be considered board game literature. To simplify things, I simply did a search for board games, and anything that was tagged with that I considered the board game literature in the LA Public Library collection. The collection consisted of exactly 81 pieces, broken up into 72 physical books, 5 visual materials, 4 DVDs, 4 electronic resources, and 1 e-audiobook. The majority of the collection was simply books about board games. The DVDs were not about board games in particular, they were simply board game themed. The movie Jumanji was included. The visual material was some Japanese manga that was themed about board games. After compiling a master list of the entire LA Library collection, I went through it one by one and looked at each individual book and tried to evaluate its contribution to the collection. This was somewhat difficult because I did not have physical access to the books, so I had to be creative online. I used a lot of Amazon and Google Books to get access to the actual content of the books. So attempted to understand any themes in the collection to see if there was any kind of deliberate collection going on here. I didn't find any particular themes. There was mostly just rule books and general histories about board games, and a few craft books about making board games, but only very few of them. Most of them were rule books and general catalogs of games. I used a number of online tools in order to evaluate the books in the collection, as well as decide what to add and what to weed. BoardGameGeek.com has a number of lists of good board game literature. There's also a forum where a number of these books are discussed. Booksinprint.com provided me with a price list for all of the books and brief descriptions of some of them. It wasn't particularly useful for descriptions, but there was some user reviews. Amazon.com had a good number of high-quality user reviews. Google Books allows you to read a number of chapters of some books. Some books are not allowed in Google Books. Shut Up and Sit Down is a board gaming blog, and they have an article about board gaming literature that is rather good. I consulted that. Goodreads has a number of reviews of board game literature, which I was able to consult. League of Game Makers has a list of board gaming literature. It's another board gaming blog. And there's also the Reddit r/boardgames, where a number of posts are made about board gaming literature that I was able to consult. For my weeding policy, I consulted the Texas State Library Crew weeding method. They have a number of guidelines that are pertinent to this collection, but most of all, they recommend the MUSTY method. MUSTY stands for M, misleading, U, ugly, S, superseded, T, trivial, I, irrelevant, or E, can be found elsewhere. These are fairly good guidelines for material that can be removed from the collection. Under these guidelines, I was able to remove 6 titles from the collection: the Playboy Winner's Guide to Board Games, Modern Board Games, published in 1970, Games and Puzzle Book of Modern Board Games, also published in the 1970s, American Games, the Comprehensive Collector's Guide, published in the 1980s, A Player's Guide to Table Games, that one was also published in the 70s, and Trivial Conquest, the smart reference source for Trivial Pursuit, published in the 1980s. All of these books were extremely outdated and contained trivial information that no one interested in modern board games would have any kind of interest in. They had strategies for Monopoly and Scrabble, but there's also very obscure, very 70s kinds of games that would not be popular today. The books were interesting, but I had to remove them. For my selection policy, I went with the idea to augment the current existing collection and to update it to be more timely, to better reflect the amount of development that board games have had in the last decade. In keeping with several LA Public Library strategic goals, I also decided to add literature about board game design and marketing. I believe this is inspiring, and it also has the potential to create economic benefit. Self-publishing in the board game world is quite easy now over a variety of internet services. A total of 27 titles were added to the collection. I will go through a number of them here quickly. Old Board Games by R.C. Bell. This complements a book that's already in the collection about antique board games by R.C. Bell. Paid to Play, A Business of Game Design. This book not only helps you design a game, but helps you market it and get it to publication. Games of No Chance. This particular book deals with games that do not involve any kind of chance, like chess, checkers, that sort of thing. The Middle Game of Go also involves that, but it's specifically about Go. This one's written by a 9th degree Go master. It will complement the Go literature that already exists in the library. Dice Games Properly Explained by Reiner Knizia. Reiner Knizia is a very prolific board game designer, and this title he explains in a mathematical sense how dice games come together. Games We Played, wonderfully illustrated book about antique board games. Kumbold Guide to Board Game Design, another book about board game design, how to play test and how to create your own games. The Game Inventor's Guidebook similarly. Euro Games, the design, culture, and play of modern European board games. This is about European strategic kind of resource games. This is a very specific kind of board game. Anyone that's really into board games will know what this book is all about. The Oxford History of Board Games. This is a good history of the development of board games through time. Theory of Fun in Game Design. This isn't specifically about board games. It can also apply to computer games, but it's a very illustrative book about how to design fun games. Challenges. It was difficult to evaluate the books that were already in the collection in order to weed them. Some of them are quite old, so it was difficult to find copies that I could actually even read in order to find out if they were quality books or not. There are several books in the collection that I simply could not evaluate, so they remain there even though they might be appropriate to read. Also, board game books are somewhat timeless, which means a lot of the books in the collection are quite old, and even though it might make the collection more presentable to read them, they are still perfectly usable books and perfectly usable for the purposes of board games. Finding lists of quality board game literature is quite difficult. It's an obscure topic. It's not something that librarians typically do, so I had to use more alternative sources. It is an obscure topic, so a lot of the best books are quite rare and expensive. This made putting together a comprehensive collection a little different. Finally, I had no idea how to put together an appropriate Spanish material collection in order to serve the demographics of the LA population specifically. I couldn't even begin to start evaluating books on Spanish board games or Spanish language books on board games. I wouldn't even know where to begin. Thank you for listening to my presentation. Here is a list of my sources. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and hit that little bell icon if you want to get notifications about new videos from my channel.